I'm an educator at the St. Louis Art Museum. Welcome to Wednesday. Today we're going to be talking about lines. Lines that are straight, lines that are wavy, lines that are zigzaggy. We'll start by reading a story together, then we'll be looking at some art from the museum's collection, and we'll end by making our own art together. Feel free to pause the video at any time if you'd like to get a closer look, if you'd like to talk about something with the people that you're with, or if you need to gather some art supplies. Are you ready? Let's get started. Today, we're going to be reading a story called Nola's Scribbles Saved the Day. If you've joined me for Wee Wednesday before, you may know that when I read a new book, I like to take a look at the cover to see if I can find out some things about the story before I read. Let's take a look at this cover together. What do you notice? I see a few different clues on this cover. I see a child here, and I notice some buildings in the background, some clouds. I see a dog up here in the front, and I notice that the child has some kind of drawing material in their hand, maybe a crayon or a marker, a pencil. And it looks like they're drawing. They might have even drawn this line here. What do you think the story might be about based on what we can see? Let's find out. Nola's Scribbles Saved the Day by Christina Lawley. Now, while we're reading the story today, I'm going to invite you to make some lines with your body. So if there's anything that doesn't feel comfortable, feel free to skip it or feel free to move in a way that does feel comfortable to you. Nola loved her scribbles. She took them everywhere. They walked hand in hand down the road, skipped together to the park, and sat side by side at the bus stop. With her scribbles, Nola created her own magical world. What do you notice about this page? What kind of lines can you see? Let's find a line in a picture. So you pick out your favorite line. And we're going to try to make that line with a part of our body. So you could use your finger or your arm or even your leg. So I found a line that was really zigzaggy. So I might try to use my fingers to make those zigzaggy lines, right? I could even connect them. I can bend my fingers. I can even make my line move with my body part, right? What does your line look like? But when Nola tried to share her scribbles with others, they could never quite see what she saw. So Nola began to hide her scribbles. She hid them in her own magical, lonely world. How do you think that made Nola feel? Have you ever made something or created something and someone else just didn't understand it? How did that make you feel? But Nola still had a tiny hope that she could create art others would understand. So she decided to fix her scribbles. She bent and twisted them in ways they didn't like to bend and twist. The harder Nola worked to change her scribbles, the harder they resisted. Still, she tried and she tried until her hands began to tremble and her mind was all worn out. Let's find another line on this page. So pick out a line that you like. Let's try to make it again as a part of our body. Maybe we're going to use something different this time. So I noticed lots of wavy lines on this page, so I might try to make those with my arm. I can bend up and down and up and down and up and down. What does your line look like? And she drew a blank. A big, boring blank. Sometimes when I'm reading a story, I like to predict what's going to happen on the next page. What do you think is going to happen next based on what we've already read? She fell right into it. Nola blinked and stared into the nothingness. She was stuck inside the blank and her scribbles were nowhere to be found. Then she heard a faint and frustrated groan. Nola realized she wasn't alone. Who else do you think might be there? One by one, many others fell in too. All types of creators were stuck on the same blank page. How would they get out? Nola had an idea, but she would have to scribble it. What if nobody understood her scribbles? What if the scribbles still refused to cooperate? There was nothing left to do but try. Nola let her scribbles be as squiggly and loopy and zigzaggy as ever. And it worked! Nola and her scribbles had enthusiasm that sparked the imaginations of all the creators. Everyone shared eagerly and built on one another's ideas. With each inspired thought and very careful footing, they created a way out together. How did Nola and her friends solve their problems? Sounds like they tried and they tried again and again, and they worked together. Unstuck from the blank page, Nola scribbled freely again. She was no longer afraid to share her magical scribbles with all her fellow creators who understood, and even those who didn't. The end. I invite you to think about your favorite part of the story and talk about that with the people that you're with. We're going to travel to the museum now to look at some works of art. Let's imagine how we might get there. Since we're talking about lines today, we're going to think about the direction in which we travel. Are you going to take a straight path all the way to the museum in a straight line? Or are you going to zigzag back and forth and back and forth? Or are you going to take your time to get there and do loops and loops and loops and loops until you get there? You decide. Once you've decided, if you'd like, you can close your eyes and imagine yourself going. Ooh, that was a dizzying journey today. I'm really glad that we made it. In order to get ready to look at our works of art, we're going to be doing an experience I'm calling our Mindfulness Minute. Mindfulness is taking the time to slow down and really pay attention to what you're doing. Since we're talking about lines today, we're going to use a couple of different tools to help us be mindful. To start, you're going to need a strip of paper. It doesn't matter what size or color it is or what kind of paper it is. So once you have your strip of paper, you can set it aside. If you need to pause the video to go get it, you can do that. And to begin, we're going to get into a comfortable position. And we're going to use a line to help us do some mindful breathing. So I have a line here on this piece of paper. How would you describe this line? So we're going to do some breathing along the waves of this line. So we're going to breathe in when the line goes up. We're going to pause at the top of the wave, and we're going to breathe out when the line goes down. And we'll do that a few times. Are you ready? Let's start. Breathe in, pause, and out. In, pause, and out. In, pause, and out. Well done. Now, you can take your strip of paper that you set aside and hold it in your hands. And I want you to take a moment just to think about how you're feeling today. Do you have a word that you might use to describe how you're feeling today? We're going to turn our strip of paper or our line into that feeling. So what if your feeling could be a line? What do you think it might look like? So maybe you're feeling really excited and energized today, and your line is really zigzaggy. So you could turn your line by folding it over and over again into a zigzaggy line. Or maybe you're feeling kind of calm and relaxed today, and your line is really wavy and curly and kind of goes with the flow. So maybe you're going to turn your line into a wavy line. Right? So maybe it's kind of curly and wavy. Or maybe you're not sure how you're feeling today or how you're feeling right now. So your line is going to remain straight, and maybe it will transform into something else later today. So if you'd like, you can think about talking about your line feelings with the other people that you're with. I feel much more ready to look at some really amazing works of art. We're going to look at some works of art from the museum's collection together. If you'd like, you can scroll down on the page to get a closer look at the images we'll be viewing. Feel free to pause the video at any time to do this. Take a close look at this work of art. What do you see? Let's zoom in to get a closer look. What new details can you see now? Let's zoom in one last time. What do you notice about the lines in this design? This is a lower body wrapper with design of the broken dagger on dark background motif. It was created by a Javanese artist. Java is an island in the nation of Indonesia. A wrapper is an item of clothing and is meant to be worn. This wrapper contains a special batik design called broken dagger that was originally to be worn only by royalty. Today, anyone can wear this design. Batik is the process of applying hot wax in a hand-drawn design onto fabric and then dyeing that fabric. The wax resists the dye, and when the wax is washed away with hot water, the design is revealed. What word would you use to describe the lines in this design? If you'd like, make a movement inspired by that word. For example, if you chose wavy, maybe you might wave your arms around. Let's see how another artist created a work of art using lines. Look carefully at this work of art. If it feels comfortable, take a look at it with your head tilted sideways or even upside down. Where is your eye drawn first? What do you notice about the lines in this painting? How are the lines the artist used different from the lines used in the last work of art we looked at together? This is a painting by an artist named Piet Mondrian. It's called Composition of Red and White, No. 1 Composition Number 4 with Red and Blue. Many of Mondrian's paintings have similar shapes, lines, and colors. Which shapes and colors do you see here? Mondrian was inspired by the sounds and energy of New York City when creating this painting. Let's take a listen and see what more we can find. What parts of a city do you see in this painting? If you'd like, think about the different types of lines you might use in your own work of art and how that might make you feel. Now that we looked at some art together, let's travel back home so we can make our own art. So think about the path that you took to get here. Maybe you're going to take the same path, or maybe you're going to take a different path. So get on your straight and narrow path, or bob along on your wavy path, or zigzag back and forth, and let's head home. For our art making project today, we are going to be doing some painting with string. So there's a few different materials that we'll need for our project today. If you'd like, you can make your own paint, which I'm going to show you how to do in a minute. Or if you have paint that you bought at the store at home, you can use that as well. We're going to need something to paint on. So I just have some paper here, but you could paint on any kind of paper you have, or cardboard or anything like that. And then you're going to need some different kinds of string. So I have some string that you might use to wrap a present. I have some twine. This is kind of some other cotton string. So any kind of string you have around your home works. You can experiment with different kinds of string. So you can go on a string hunt and see what you can find in your home. And that's pretty much all the materials that we'll need. Now, if you want to make your own paint, you'll need a few other items. So for the recipe that I'm going to use today, we're just going to need 4 ingredients. So we're going to need 1/4 cup of flour. So I'm going to dump this in my bowl. 1/2 cup of water. And 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And I'm just going to mix it all up with a spoon. This is the fun part. So if you're doing this at home, you might want to go to a place where you can be a little messier than normal, maybe in your kitchen or on a table somewhere. And you want to make sure it's really well mixed so that your paint is really smooth. So you see you kind of have some flour clumps on the side there. I want to make sure all of those get incorporated into the mixture. So that looks pretty well mixed to me. Now for our grown-ups who are watching, if you are wanting to use this with little ones who might like to put things in their mouths or taste things, if you just microwave the flour for like 30 seconds on high, this will make this paint taste safe, so it's okay if they taste it. It's not going to taste very good, but it won't hurt them if they end up trying it. So now this looks pretty smooth, and next you'll need is color if you want to make colorful paint. So there's a few different things you can use. I'm going to use food coloring today, which is kind of the easiest thing to use. You can also use like watercolors. If you have watercolors at home, you can experiment with different kinds of spices that you might have in your kitchen. So if you're going to use food coloring, I've got green here. And you really only need like 1 or 2 drops. And I'm just going to make this whole batch one color because I already made some other paint earlier in the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. But if you wanted to, you could split up this mixture into different bowls, and then you would add your food coloring so that you would get all the colors that you want, because this batch makes enough for about 3 to 4 colors. So now I have this nice green color, and if you want to try to make it darker, you could add some more. So I might want it a little darker than that. That created kind of a nice lime green, but we'll add a couple more drops, see what happens. So you can kind of experiment with adding color. You could try to mix colors, so now it's a little bit darker. So now we have our paint. And you can think about what you want the consistency to look like. So since we're painting with string, we want it to be a little on the thinner side so that it'll stick to our string, but it won't be too thick and kind of gloopy. If you want it to be thicker, you can add a little bit more flour. And if you want it to be thinner, you can add more water. It's kind of up to you to make the mixture that you like. This is the mixture that I like, but you might like something different once you start painting. And I will say the longer that it sits, the thicker it gets. So if you kind of make it and set it aside for a while, it is going to thicken up a bit. So you might need to add more water. Just make sure you stir it up before you use it. So now I think we're ready to do some painting with our string. So we've been talking all about lines today and different ways that artists use lines and different kinds of lines and how they might make us feel. So you can think about what kind of line painting you might want to make. Are you going to use wavy lines, zigzaggy lines, straight lines? It's up to you. So we're only going to be painting with string today, which is kind of an interesting material to paint with. So you can do this in a lot of different ways. One of the easiest ways is really to dip your paint. So I have my green paint here. Dip your string in the paint. And then to just start dragging it across the page. And you can see all the different kinds of lines that it makes. And it's similar to painting with a paintbrush in that way. You control what kind of lines it makes. Ooh, so see, I noticed I'm even getting some of the texture of the string that I used. And you can use a different string for a different color, or you can just keep dipping the same piece of string in different color paint. So I'm gonna try some blue now. And another thing you can do is kind of put your string into a shape and then just kind of press it and see what kind of lines that makes. Experiment with different colors. You could think about putting, all your straight lines in one color, all your wavy lines in another color, or you can just kind of see what happens. So this kind of string is making a different kind of texture than the string that I used for the green. And that's fun to see what different kinds of string, which lines they make. I'll try the wrapping paper string now. I think this one's going to be very different. And this is definitely a messy project, so make sure you get to a place where you can be messy. Ooh, see, this has nice, really thick lines because the string is much thicker than the other string that I was using. And just think about getting inspired by different things. Maybe you're inspired by the artwork that we saw today. Maybe you're inspired by a certain feeling, kind of like when we talked about how maybe a feeling might make you think of a different shape of a line. And there's lines everywhere we go and in all the objects that we see, so you can get inspired by so many different kinds of lines throughout your day. You can also kind of just do some pressing. That's making kind of some different shapes. I haven't used any of my yellow paint yet. So I'm really gonna dip that string in there. Ooh, yeah, nice and gloopy here. You can kind of just set your string and then try to move it, see what happens. And that's creating kind of some different kinds of lines. And if you want to combine this technique with other painting techniques that you like to use, you can do that too. So you can use a paintbrush or your fingers or hands, other objects that you like to paint with. I like painting with string when I'm thinking about lines just because it naturally makes its own kind of line. So I just kind of press that on there. That's another way you can do it, is kind of dip it in paint, add your line on the page, and then just kind of press it. What else should we use? Let's try some more blue. I think we're needing more blue in this painting. I like those kind of wavy lines that it's making. So I'm just going to do a little bit more painting. sufficiently messy and covered in paint, and I've got lots of different kinds of lines on my page. And this is kind of a fun thing to do when you're all finished, is to look at your painting and to see what kind of lines you made. So did you make wavy lines? Did you make zigzaggy lines? And there's also lots of opportunities to look for different shapes too. So that's going to be our painting with string. Thank you for joining me today here at Wee Wednesday. We hope you had fun. I wanted to show you another example of some string painting that I did. So this is the example of the one that we made together. I just put it on a clipboard because it's still a little wet. That we used lots of different kinds of string, and this was the homemade paint. I made another string painting on a piece of cardboard. If you don't have paper at home or you want to experiment on cardboard, and I used different kinds of string and the same paint that we made together. And this one I made earlier today, so you can actually see that it started to dry, and this is what it's going to look like when it dries. It dries to be a lighter color, and you can kind of see the difference between the wet paint and the dry paint, so that's kind of cool. So we would love to see your string paintings. You can share them with us on social media and use the hashtag STLArtMuseum and Wee Wednesday. We hope to see you next time. Keep on creating. Bye.